Hey guys, welcome to the Bourbon Basement. I'm Steve. As you can see, we don't have Ryan tonight, but I'm lucky enough to get him for our live shows on Friday. So he's not going to be able to make every show with me on the videos, but we're getting a lot of questions from viewers and from friends about bourbon and just what to do in a store. Hey, what am I looking for? What should I buy? All this kind of stuff. So today I just wanted to make a video and talk about bourbon with you. But first, if you watched our live episode last night, we did a show on Blade and Bow, and I think I'm going to finish this bottle while we talk about some bourbon today. So, at this time, if you are over 21 and you see this video and you want to grab a bourbon and have a drink with me, we can be buddies tonight as we talk about some bourbon. If you're new to bourbon, this may be very informative to you. If you are an experienced bourbon guy and you know a lot about bourbon and what makes bourbon and what to look for, then probably don't need to watch this video unless you just want to sit back, have a drink, and listen to me goof around back here. Anyway, this is the kind of stuff I love. So they say, hey, Steve, what's the difference in a bourbon and a whiskey? So we uh, we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. So sorry about the pauses when I drink. Anyway, this is chicken cock, double oaked. It's aged 8 years. It's a Kentucky whiskey, not a Kentucky bourbon whiskey, but a Kentucky whiskey. So why is that a whiskey where this is a Kentucky straight bourbon? And this is a Kentucky straight bourbon. Well, I'll tell you a little bit about it. So, to be a bourbon, they have rules, right? So the first rule for anything to be a bourbon is to be made in the United States of America or their territory. So if you're in the U.S. Virgin Islands and you're making some bourbon, that, or you're making distilling some product there, that is going to be a bourbon. The second one is it must be 51, at least 51% corn. Most bourbons will have more corn in it than that. It has to be aged in a new charred oak barrel, or I'm sorry, oak container. So the reason they use barrels is because it's just the history. Barrels are easy to move, easy to transport. They can roll around and get places. Whereas if you had a cube or something, 550-pound cube, a little bit harder to move than a 550-pound barrel, right? So now here's some stuff that you may not know about bourbon. Those are probably all, you're probably like, oh, I knew that, I knew that, I knew that. Well, so bourbon can't be distilled at more than 160 proof. So you can distill it at 160, but not above that. Then to bottle it, you have to, if it comes off the still at 150, you have to water that down. That's the only thing you can add to bourbon. We'll talk about that in a minute. But you got to water that down, get it down to 125 proof before you put it in the barrel. So bourbon cannot enter the barrel at more than 125 proof. Then it has to be bottled at least 80 proof, right? So those are some rules. Uh, Another one is you cannot add anything to bourbon. So the only thing you put in bourbon is water for proofage. Okay. So it comes off the still, it goes into a barrel. The barrel is what gives it all of its color and all of its flavor. And that's from time in the barrel and weather. And there's a lot of contributing factors on that. Was it hot? Was it cold? Did it contract and do all that stuff like it's supposed to do? That's what gives bourbon its color and its flavors. Nothing else is added. They don't put no caramel color in there. They don't put no food coloring. They don't put no artificial flavors in there. All right. So that's what bourbon is. So when you go into the store and you're looking for something, if it says bourbon on it, it has followed all those rules and it'll say it right on the label, bourbon. All right. Now you see that this is whiskey. Why? Well, I looked it up just for this. It follows all the rules, but when they distill this, they age this in already used bourbon barrels. So they put their distillant into a used bourbon barrel, and then this one's double oak. Then they put it into a new white oak barrel, which is odd. but that cannot be a bourbon because they had put it into a used barrel. So we're done talking about the whiskey because what we're here to discuss is the bourbon. So these two here, these are Kentucky straight bourbon whiskeys, both of these. What I tried to do is I tried to give you a couple of different examples so you can look at labels and bottles and years and everything else. This is a typical Maker's Mark. It is a special proof at 101, but it's a Kentucky straight bourbon. And what does Kentucky straight bourbon mean? So, well, Kentucky, all bourbon doesn't have to be made in Kentucky. We just talked about that. Although 95% of the bourbon is made in Kentucky, it doesn't have to be. It can be made anywhere in the United States. But a straight bourbon means it's been aged for at least 2 years. So every barrel of bourbon that went into making this bottle is at least 2 years old for the straight bourbons. Now, this has an 8-year age statement. This one has no age statement, so that means it's at least 2 years old, every barrel that went in this straight bourbon. This one, every barrel is at least 8 years old. So now, can it have a 12-year-old barrel in it? Yes. Can it have a 10? Yes. But the minimum age on any barrel that went to make this bottle has to be 8 years old. So that's what straight is. Straight means it's been uh, aged at least 2 years, and that's how you get a straight bourbon whiskey. So let's move on. If there's any questions, you all can watch this video back. This is not a live, so watch it, comment. I'll try to go back and answer those questions. I do like the comments and stuff, and I do try to respond to those. So if anybody will do that, I'm sure Ryan can teach me how to respond where he doesn't have to since he's not doing the episode. The next thing I'm going to talk about, uh, I'm bringing out 3 more bottles. And the reason is, so this is bottled in bond bourbon. This is not. This one is bottled in bond. So bottled in bond bourbon. I'll talk a little bit about that. And this is Chestnut Farms bottled in bond. This is Heaven Hill bottled in bond. And you can see bottled in bond right on the label there. I hope it comes in clear enough for you guys. But what I wanted to say too is, so we found out what straight bourbon was. Straight bourbon, at least 2 years. This one's at least 8. Uh, so let me do this bottle. Straight bourbon, at least 2 years. This one here, this is, it says bourbon whiskey. All right. So it doesn't say straight bourbon whiskey. So when you see just bourbon whiskey, this bourbon has probably been aged less than 2 years. And that's why it cannot have straight on the label. So it just says bourbon whiskey. So it still qualifies as a bourbon because it followed every rule I just talked about as a bourbon, but they didn't age it long enough. So it is a bourbon whiskey. Small batch, but bourbon whiskey. And we'll talk about batches here in a minute. Uh, so bourbon whiskey means it's aged less than 2 years. Now, it didn't give an age statement for bourbon. So basically, to be a bourbon, you can distill that. Just say you distill it at 160, you proof it down to 125, you put it in a brand new charred oak container, and then you keep it in there an hour and you dump it and you start bottling it. That can be a bourbon as long as you didn't add nothing else to it, right? And you followed all the requirements of bourbon. It is a bourbon. So you can actually label that a bourbon, but it's a bourbon whiskey. It's not bourbon, a straight bourbon or anything like that. Now, I should have said this earlier, but all bourbon is whiskey. So you're going to see straight bourbon whiskey, small batch bourbon whiskey, Kentucky bourbon whiskey, uh, bourbon whiskey. You're going to see that on these labels. All bourbon is whiskey, but not all whiskey is bourbon, which I proved with this one. Okay. Not all whiskey is bourbon, but all bourbon is whiskey. So don't be confused by seeing bourbon whiskey on the label because all bourbon is whiskey. All right. So the reason I put this one up here is because I wanted to talk a little bit before I got into the bottled and bond why it's just bourbon. I told you about the years. Now, why would anybody want to do that? Because if you just dump it in a barrel and it doesn't sit there anytime, it's not going to get a lot of color. It's not going to get a lot of flavor. But you can see this one is it's pretty dark for a less than 2 year old bourbon. So you wonder how that may happen. I don't know. I'm unfamiliar with this 1620 distilling company. Very unfamiliar with it. I got this bottle for this show because it's one of the few that I found with bourbon whiskey on it. But I do know that there are some craft distilleries that are not putting their bourbon in 53-gallon barrels. They're putting their bourbon in 8 10-gallon barrels. Uh, and what that does is that bourbon matures faster than 53-gallon barrel. Okay. Because you have more distillate touching the outside of that barrel, getting more absorption, getting all that stuff. So the bourbon will mature a lot faster in those small barrels. Now, they can't make more because they have a small barrel. You know, you're going to get less bottles out of a 10-gallon barrel than you do out of a 53-gallon barrel. Uh, Probably about a fifth. But anyway, that's what may be happening and what you see these bourbon whiskeys uh, is because some of those craft distillers use a smaller barrel to do it. We have one here in Paris, Kentucky called Hartfield and Company. They used to do that. I'm not sure if they still do. Maybe they still do and they still mix them. I haven't toured that facility, so I don't know, but I know they used to use the smaller ones to get product out quicker so they could do that. So that's what I'm thinking maybe going on with that 1620 right there. Uh, So now let's talk about bottled and bond. So the bottled and bond, there's rules, just like there is for bourbon, to be a bottled and bond bourbon. So the standard was outlined in the Bottled and Bond Act of 1897. Then why did the government have to take control and put an act that says this is what happens to bourbon or to be a bottled and bond bourbon? It's because back before 1897, there was rectifiers and basically salesmen of bourbon, and people would go and buy a barrel from a distillery, and they take it out. Some people, there were some very good rectifiers, and there was some very bad rectifiers. Some people would just hit town, go buy the cheapest bourbon barrel that they could buy. They would add rusty nails to it to get color. They would add tobacco spit because back in the day there was spit tunes in public where people would spit their tobacco, and they would grab those spittoons and put in that barrel of bourbon to get that odor, that color, that darker color. Uh, they put a lot of additives in it, even arsenic and stuff like that. So just change bourbon, and then they would try to sell that for a quick buck, and then they'd be out of town, right? So those were bad rectifiers, and there was a lot of bad bourbon being made out there because people would sell them the bourbon, they would do all this stuff to it, make people sick and everything else. So even government officials like to drink bourbon. So they put some rules to be bottled in bond so it could be more secure and more, I guess, a sense of security that the bourbon is going to be a good quality and stuff like that. So let's talk about bottled in bond. So bottled in bond bourbon has to be produced by one distillery from start to finish. Any distillery can make a bottled and bond as long as they have a bonded warehouse, and we'll talk about that in a second. Uh, but it's produced by one distillery. So the distiller has to distill the product, they have to bottle the product, and then they have to send it to a bonded warehouse to age. Okay. Now, a bonded warehouse is just a place where the government has the lock and key to this. They have their tax man right there. You bring the barrel in, they put it in there, they know where it is, they check on it, they inspect it, they know nothing's being done to it. And that's that security and quality control that we're talking about. So then it has to be produced in one season, and the season is from January to June or July to December. So all the grains and everything have to be made from January to whatever, one season. They have to be one season, has to be produced, distilled, bottled, and put in a warehouse in one season. Uh, Bottled in bond bourbon has to be 100 proof. I don't say it has to be at least 100 proof. It has to be 100 proof. And then it has to be aged at least 4 years. So if you go around and you find a bottled in bond bourbon, if it says bottled in bond on the bottle, you know that bottle is at least 4 years old. Okay. So this one here is Chestnut Farms Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey, bottled in bond. So we know it's at least 4 years old. Now, the reason I pulled the Heaven Hill bottled in bond out of there so you could see it is because this Heaven Hill bottled in bond is a Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey, and this bourbon is 7 years old. It's one of the oldest bottled in bond bourbons that I know. So that's why I pulled it out. So it has to be at least 4 years old, 100 proof. The label that is on this has to tell the distillery, which this one is Heaven Hill, of course, the distillery that it was distilled and bottled at. So this one here is Heaven Hill. I haven't looked at this one. Clear Springs Distilling Company in Frankfort, Kentucky. That's on that. Uh, So that's the bottled and bond. So bottled and bond assured the authenticity and quality of the product. It was seen as a higher uh, standard. So that's bottled and bond bourbon. So if you see a bottled and bond, you know you're getting at least a 4 year old 100 proof bourbon. Uh, and that's pretty good. 100 proof is a good proofage, and 4 years is a pretty good age. All right, so now let's talk a little bit more about the differences in some of the bourbons. So that's pretty much the rules in bourbon, but now you might still be confused about some of the labels. So I'm going to pick out a couple here. These are both small batches. So what does small batch mean? Well, let me tell you, it really doesn't mean anything. All it means is that the distillant was never vatted in a humongous vat to be put into a big product. So example of that, let's go off the shelf here. Uh, Jim Beam. This is a Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. It's probably because they dump 500 to 1,000 barrels per one batch. It gets vatted, and then they fill a gazillion bottles. All right. So, the small batch means that this one here, in particular, small batch 1792, means that it's made with less barrels than their standard 1792 Kentucky Straight Bourbon. Okay, so small batch means it's made with less barrels. It doesn't say how many less barrels. It doesn't say it's 10 barrels. It doesn't say it's 5 barrels. It doesn't say it's 100. But if they use, let's just let's just say they use 100 barrels in their Kentucky Straight Bourbon, then a small batch can use anywhere from 99 or below. That's what a small batch means. Now, this cream of Kentucky small batch, it's a Kentucky Straight Bourbon whiskey bottled by Cream of Kentucky. Oh man, I thought it told me how many barrels was in it, but it does not. But all small batch means is that it's less than what they normally use. So there's no standard governing that or anything like that, like the Bottled and Bond Act. Still have bottled and bond government secured warehouses. This is just the small batch because they say it is. All right. Kind of advertising, I think. But small batches, to me, they are a little bit better than the straight on the big ones. All right. So what we got next? Okay. So other kind of bourbons that you can see are single barrel bourbons. So this here is the Jim Beam single barrel bourbon. Uh, it's just a select batch. It's 108 proof. Um, Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. So that's the Jim Beam single barrel. Now, if you can guess, single barrel means that each one of these, this is a 10-year-old single barrel. So each one of these is made from one barrel of bourbon. So 1 barrel bourbon, 53-gallon barrel. I don't know how old this one is. We know it's a straight, so we know it's at least 2 years. I think I've read somewhere that they're 5 or 6 year olds on their single barrels on Jim Beam. I don't know for a fact because it doesn't have an age statement on the bottle. This Michter's, however, does have an age statement on the bottle and says it's 10 years. So we know that this single barrel bourbon was 10 years old. Was it 11 or 12? I guess it could be, but they would have put 11 or 12-year-old. So we know it's 10-year-old for that bourbon. Uh, and that's also Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey, 10-year-old. So single barrel means one. So if you have a 10-year-old single barrel, you're probably going to get that one barrel probably made, I don't know, let's about 155 to 165 bottles at 10-year-old, maybe more, maybe about 200. I think. I don't know. I'm confused now with the questions I asked at the distilleries when I go on tour and stuff. But anyway, that's a 10-year-old single barrel. So they got probably just say 200 bottles out of that barrel. And some of the single barrels will have a label on there that says bottle whatever out of whatever. Some of them don't. Neither one of these do. But that's what a single barrel is. All right. Let's see what I had next. I kind of put some bottles over here in order for me to just keep the talking points about. So you might find something like this when you go looking for bourbon to buy. This one is E.H. Colonel E.H. Taylor, uh, barrel proof. And this one is Oemer, uh, cask strength. Cask strength and barrel proof are exactly the same thing. So it just means that they've taken the barrels that make this batch. So this is a straight Kentucky bourbon whiskey. So that means they take in the barrels. What they've done is just say they take 50 barrels, they dump them all into a batch, and they start pouring this bourbon in here. Uh, each one of those barrels were at barrel proof. They didn't use any water or nothing to dilute the barrels. They dumped them all into the vat, made some bottles with it. Uh, this one come out at 63.65 alcohol, which is going to be about 127.3 proof. So that's your Colonel E.H. Taylor barrel proof. Your Oemer cask strength, it's the same thing, Kentucky straight bourbon. So we know every barrel that goes in this because they're both straight are at least 2 years old. I think these are about 6. I'm not sure on Old Emer. Uh, but it come out at 61.3%. So your barrel strength is interesting because if you go back to what I first talked about, they go in the barrel at 125 proof. I'm sorry, no more than 125 proof. So the proofage goes up as it ages in that barrel. That alcohol, that gets more alcohol as it ages in the barrel, and the longer it ages, probably the more alcohol it makes. Uh, I don't know. But that being said, every barrel proof is going to be different. Not every one of them is going to turn out the same. Just like every single barrel that you taste is going to be a little different. They're going to try to keep it as close as possible because people have an expectation when they grab those single barrels. But they're all going to be a little bit different. Now, to my and your taste, we probably wouldn't even notice. But sometimes you're going to notice the difference in a single barrel. And I think that's why some of these bourbons that you may see on auctions or something like that, you get like batch 12 or whatever is, oh, this one's excellent. And you see the prices of those things going a little bit higher than you do on the prices of some of your others. Uh, but cask strength and barrel strength are the same thing. It means they dump the barrels and they don't add water to it to dilute that proofage. What you get out of the barrels is what you got. Now, if you're using 50 barrels or 10 barrels, uh, then it's just they just do the alcohol by volume at the end to see what that strength is. I hope I'm clearing some questions up for some of you all, and that's been curious and it's been asking. I hope it's not doing anything I'm hope I'm not confusing you anymore. All right, let's get into some more methods here. Now, so bourbon, I told you, had to be at least 51%. All right. Well, the second ingredient in that, a lot of times is rye, and then you use the malted barley. So a lot of bourbons that you'll see will be corn, rye, barley. Just say 75, 20, and 5. 75 corn, 20 rye, 5 barley, malted barley. All right. So a lot of those that you see will be like that. Some will use wheat as their second ingredient. All right, so you'll have 75 corn, 20 wheat, and 5 malted barley. Now, if you look at the rye, if you get one that's high rye, just say it's 60 corn and 30 rye and 10 malted barley, you're going to be looking at probably a little bit more spicy bourbon. If you go to a wheat, you're probably looking at a little more sweet bourbon. Uh, Grainy, bread, stuff like that, pastries and kind of stuff like that. Uh, so if you look at a bourbon and it says wheated on there, that means the second ingredient is wheat because it's still a bourbon. We know it's 51% corn, so it's still a bourbon, but it could be 51% corn, uh, 40 wheat, and 9 malted barley. We don't know, and you have to really research to find some of these mash bills. But this is bluegrass. This is Bluegrass Distilleries. It's a straight bourbon whiskey finished with oak staves. We'll talk about finishing in a minute, but it's 100 proof and it's weeded. All right. So when it says weeded, when I see one that says weeded, this is a Castle and Key. It's a cast strength weeded Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. And so when I see it and I see a weeded bourbon, it makes me think that the rest of their products are rye based or rye forward. So you got the corn and then the rye is the second highest ingredient. Uh, and so when it says weeded, that makes it seem like it's special because they don't usually do a lot of weeded stuff. So uh, I do like weeded bourbons, and I'll give you another. Now, not all bourbons will say if they're a second ingredient weeded. Not all of them will say weeded, and that's why I've got the Van Winkle up here. So this is a Van Winkle 12-year-old. It's the Lot B. It is 90.4 proof Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. Now this one is 12 years old, so it says Kentucky Straight Bourbon. We knew it was over two, but they actually put an age statement on the bottle, which I like. The age statement on the bottle is 12 years. So I know that this bourbon here, every barrel that was dumped to make this bottle was at least 12 years old. Could it have a 20-year-old barrel in there? Yes. Could it have a 15-year-old barrel in there? Yes. Can it have a 10-year-old barrel in there? No. Or then it would be a 10-year-old. So anyway, the youngest barrel is the age statement. So I do like when they do that. But if you read anything about Pappy and all that kind of stuff, the Van Winkle, it is a wheat forward bourbon. Uh, and the wheat forward means that wheat is the second highest ingredient. So they got at least 51% corn, and then wheat is the next ingredient. They don't advertise that it's wheated because they're always wheated. So that's why I put that in there. So some of them that are wheated won't say wheated. You got to do a little bit of research if you want wheated. Find out what bourbons do have wheat as their second ingredient. Some of them will tell you, some of them won't. It's kind of a secret, but that's why the wheated. So you can have a wheated bourbon. You can have a rye forward bourbon. Now, can you have a bourbon that is 51% wheat? No, because corn has to be the leading ingredient and it has to be more than 51%. All right, let's see what we got next. All right, so you may go into the store and you may see a double oak or a triple oak even. All right, so what that means is that these are bourbons. These are both bourbons, and you can see because this is Woodford Reserve, double oaked Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. I think these are about 6 years old. They don't put an age statement on it. So they can have a 2-year-old barrel in there because it's Kentucky straight, but they can't have anything less than a 2-year-old barrel. But I think most of theirs are about 6 years old. The double oaked are usually a little bit more. This is Angel's Envy. This one is a triple oak. And so I'll tell you a little bit about the oak and oak and oak and oak. Anyway, so what they do is bourbon has to be aged in a new charred oak container. So both of these bourbons were aged in a new charred oak container. Then this one was dumped into another new, I think, toasted oak container. It just says finished in a second oak barrel. I think when I did my show on this, it's a toasted oak barrel. So they do it in a charred barrel. They age it, I think they age it like 5 or 6 years, and then they put it into a toasted barrel for another 6 months to a year. Uh, Angel's Envy, on the other hand, this was aged in a new charred oak barrel. And then this one in particular was finished in a blend of Hungarian pea chickapin and French oak barrels. So I haven't learned the process of theirs yet. I haven't studied that. But on some of the triple oaks that I've read about, what they do is they take uh, the barrel that they have, they dump those barrels into other barrels, Hungarian, and then they would dump that into another barrel. Or, but what I think that Angel's Envy does is they don't like dump one barrel into another and into another. I think they have many barrels. They dump, they put some into the Hungarian, they put some into the French, and then they blend the French and the Hungarian and the regular one and make their triple oak. It's a little confusing, but if you see triple oak, you know that that bourbon has touched three different barrels. Double oak, you know that bourbon has touched two different barrels and has been aged. So usually these are a little bit older if you're looking for an older bourbon. But neither one of these have an age statement. I'm not sure how long this one is aged, but we know by being a straight bourbon, a Kentucky straight bourbon, that at least it is at least 2 years old. All right, let's go to the next one. Cheers, by the way, won't we? Is anybody on their second one of these yet? Because I'm talking too much and can't really get through one. All right, now, so we talked about some barrels and how they get finished, right? You get in double barrels. So we've gone through bourbon, uh, we've gone through straight bourbon, we've gone through bottled and bond bourbon, we've gone through cask strength bourbon or barrel proof bourbon, we've gone through single barrel bourbon, uh, we've gone through some weeded, and then we've gone through some multiple barrels. This is similar to multiple barrels, but it's a finishing product. So they call these finished. If you look at this one, this is the O Forster 117 series. It's a rum finish. And basically, what they've done is they've taken barrels of bourbon, O Forster bourbon, they've aged them in brand new white oak barrels, and they've dumped them in some rum barrels, some used rum barrels. Empty, of course. There's no rum left in these. You cannot have any product of what was left in these because then you would be adding flavor or coloring or both. So it has to be completely empty and dried before they can put anything in it. Some of your bourbon purists will say that that's not bourbon because if you've got rum in a previous barrel and the barrel has soaked up that rum, the barrel's completely dry. But you pour another product in there, you get that wood wet again, you age it in there so it gets in there. Well, it joins the rum that's already in that barrel and then it comes out. So you are adding flavor or coloring or both. Uh, but to the bourbon rule gods, that's okay. As long as it ain't like a half a barrel of rum or even a smidgen of rum in the barrel, you're not adding nothing to it, is what they say. So, except what the barrel gives it. So, uh, it's it's kind of a gray area that a lot of distilleries and a lot of bourbons are doing right now. I bet you can go to any product out there and you see finishing, either stave finished or barrel finished. I don't know how I feel about it. Uh, as far as is it bourbon or not? It is bourbon because it is bourbon. Uh, but do I want to be mad about it or do I want to just like it and go on? Um, I I buy it, and there's some of it that's really good. Uh, so I'm okay with it. I hope that doesn't make me lose a viewer or lose a subscriber, but I'm okay with it. Uh, but this is a rum finished. Uh, so it's Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey finished in rum cast. So basically self-explanatory. At least 2 years old. Bourbon goes into a rum cast finish and ages longer, and then they dump that and bottle it. This one here was from my visit recently to Rabbit Hole. It's Rabbit Hole Verlade, I guess is how you pronounce that. It's a Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey finished in a Lorso cask. I don't even know what a Lorso cask is, so I don't know what flavors I'm supposed to be looking for in that. But it's a limited edition bottle. When I went there, I was looking for something to purchase. This was the most interesting one, so I got it and I thought I'd try it. But that is your finish. So you can have finished bourbon too. It can be finished in different barrels, not only second and third barrels, but also rum or Larso barrels or French oak or anything like that. So now some more things that are going to be maybe confusing to some of you bourbon people. All right, especially the new ones to bourbon. So what I have here, I have come some Kentucky straight bourbon whiskeys. Uh, these I like to call sourced. These are sourced bourbon whiskeys. So these are made by non-distilling producers. Uh, I have a bunch of these, and there are a bunch of non-distilling producing producers out there. And what they do is they source their bourbon from other distilleries. So some distilleries will have a bunch of barrels that they're not going to use for whatever reason or another. The taste profile doesn't meet what they're looking for. Uh, and they put those barrels on the market. And these non-distilling producers, this NDPs, uh, the NDPs, they come and they buy those bourbons up. Now, what they do is they take those bourbons. Let's just say Bluegrass distilled a bunch of bourbon, and they're going to use it in their small batch. But it doesn't taste like their small batch. When they blend it, it isn't meshing well with what they got. The taste profile's off, so they decide to sell some. So I got uh, now you met Farm right here. They go and they say, "Hey, I want to buy some of those barrels," and they buy 100 barrels of that Bluegrass is trying to get rid of. I'm sure these two have a place that they go regularly. I don't know, but they buy those, they mix them together, and they get the place profile that they're looking for, and then they put out a 10-year-old Kentucky straight bourbon. So this Calumet Farm, it is a source bourbon, but every barrel that we have in this bourbon is at least 10 years old. Uh, but we know it's multiple barrels. A lot of Calumet farms will tell you how many barrels they put in it, and of course, when I want it, this one does not. Kentucky Owl's the same way. Maybe they go down to Green River, and Green River's selling off some barrels, so they get those and they make a bourbon out of it. I'm sure these bourbons have been around pretty long time. I'm sure they have a distillery that they go to regularly and get their stuff because uh, they want it to be kind of consistent too. Because these are pretty popular bourbons. So I don't know, but that's source. So you can have some bourbons that do not distill anything that are for sale in your store too. So just watch your labels and check your labels out. Uh, and some of these source bourbons. So you all know probably that I'm a Kentucky bourbon collector, not because I'm biased to Kentucky. It's just that I live in Kentucky and 95% of the bourbon's made in Kentucky. So I'd like to try all the Kentucky bourbon, buy all the Kentucky bourbon, own all the Kentucky bourbon. I want to know what all of it tastes like because before I start exploring other options. Now I do have some non-Kentucky bourbons. I'll never do a show on, but I do have them. I have tried them. I have drank them, and it's not that I'm against it, but to do a show to spend my funds. I'm gonna buy Kentucky bourbon just so I can do a show on it. So that's where it gets to this. So that's a sourced that's a source bourbon where they go and they buy barrels from other people. This here is a private label bourbon. This one's private label for Liquor Barn. I think they get this made at, I don't want to tell you some false information, but I'm pretty sure the Sazerac company makes this 1792. Distilled, aged, and bottled in the heartland of Kentucky. Founders Company, bottled by the Founders Company. It doesn't say where it's distilled. Some of this is secret, but this is a private label. What that means. So this is private label for Liquor Barn. That means that someone, whoever does their private labels and whoever does their tastings and whoever's in charge of that, if you're looking for somebody, I'm available. Uh, but whoever's in charge of that, they go to a distillery. I believe this one is Barton 1792, uh, and they say, "Hey, I'd like to have a private label for Liquor Barn, only Liquor Barn. You're only going to find it at Liquor Barn. We want that to draw people in to buy that bourbon for us." And so, just say 1792 says, "Okay, what's your recipe?" And they say, "I don't know." So then 1792 says, "Well, hey, we got several recipes that you can try, you can taste, you can see which one you like." Then Liquor Barn says, "Yeah, I like this one." So they say, "Okay, well, we'll distill that for you. We'll age that for you. We'll bottle that for you. Pick your bottle, pick your label, pick all this stuff." And so that's what that is. So source bourbon's a little bit different because they go and get barrels. Private label means the distillery's going to make it for you. Uh, then the last one, and I think that this will finish us up with the bourbon talk. I hope y'all have some questions. I know I'm forgetting something, uh, but it's blended bourbon. Now, blended bourbon. This is a good one. Now, most of your bourbon, I'm going to say, and this is going to be, it's a broad statement. Most of your bourbon, unless it is a single barrel, is blended to some extent, but it's all blended with the same distillate that was used by the same company. But they blend different years to get taste profiles, different barrels, different parts of the warehouse, different warehouses. But just say it's all Maker's Mark bourbon. So all Maker's Mark bourbon to make a small batch bourbon or a Kentucky straight bourbon, they go through, they sample a bunch of barrels, they put a bunch of barrels together, see how they taste. When that meets their taste profile, that's the barrels they blend together, which is all Maker's Mark, and they blend it and they get their Kentucky straight bourbon or their small batch bourbon or whatever they're trying to create. Except the single barrel. The single barrel is not blended with anything. It's one complete barrel. And to get back to those single barrels, to be a single barrel, you dump one barrel, you bottle one barrel, and then you clean the line. And then you dump another barrel, you bottle another barrel, and can clean the line. There is no contaminants. You can't have anything left from one barrel before the next barrel goes in. So I don't know if some of these places do that kind of thing by hand or if they dump it down the line and they run it on the line. I don't know. But one barrel, the liquid left in that line cannot touch the next barrel or it becomes a small batch and no longer a single barrel. So that tells you something about single barrels. They're very particular. But these two right here, in particular, these are blended bourbons. This is the only one of these I've had. This is excellent. Okay. And I'll do a show on this one day. This is Evan Williams Master Blend. It's Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. So it means they don't have an age statement on it, but it just means every barrel of whiskey that was used to make this, or bourbon whiskey, that was used to make this, is at least 2 years old. This is the rare hair. It's a blended bourbon whiskey finished with French oak staves. So we don't have to worry about the finish because we're talking about blended. We've already done the French oak staves. Well, staves. So I did tell you about finish it in different barrels. Well, there are also a stave finish. So you'll see something that says stave finish, French oak stave. What that means is they've taken parts of the barrel apart. Each one of those things in a barrel is a stave, okay? They've taken that apart and they've actually inserted that into the barrel that is aging of bourbon. They've inserted these staves in there, and that barrel, that bourbon goes and it gets in those French oak staves and it ages with that. And that is what a stave finish is. They actually insert those into the barrel. So instead of dumping the barrel into a different barrel to let it age, they just add staves to the barrel that they are aging. Okay, that's what stave finish is. So I don't have this. I guess this is the only one I put up here, and I didn't even think about talking about stave finish. So blended bourbon. Now this is Evan Williams. So I'm kind of don't know if it's the same as I'm going to say here, but blended bourbon means you can go around, you can buy a bourbon from Wild Turkey, you can buy 2 barrels from Wild Turkey, 3 barrels from Maker's Mark. You can buy a barrel from uh, Bluegrass. You can buy a barrel from Woodford, and you can put all those barrels together, blend them all together, and make a blended bourbon. So your blended bourbon, you're probably not going to find the mash bill or the recipe for that because I don't know how you would know it. If you mixed 5 different distilleries, 5 different recipes together, how would you know what the recipe for the one you have is? But that's what a blended bourbon is. So I think blended bourbons are probably pretty sporadic with their taste. I think if you see one blended bourbon, uh, and then you go buy the next batch of it, they won't. It'll be totally different. And I think that's why a lot of these have batches. Uh, Maker's Mark, they're pretty popular, pretty old. You don't really see any batch numbers or anything like that on them because when you buy a bottle of Maker's Mark, it's pretty consistent. It's going to taste like the other bottle of Maker's Mark. It's going to go back, you go back 50 years and it'll probably taste like Maker's Mark. It's pretty consistent. They've gotten really good at making it all taste the same. Well, blended bourbon, it's probably going to be different because they're going to buy from different distilleries. They're going to have different mash bills. They're going to have different years. This one is the rare hair. It's actually 7 years old, so we know that every barrel in this is at least 7 years old, but we don't know where any of the barrels came from. This one is actually not a Kentucky bourbon. It's a bourbon whiskey, so it did not come from Kentucky. Uh, so what that means is, can it have 5 barrels from Kentucky and one from Indiana? Yes, it can. So it can't be a Kentucky bourbon unless it's aged, distilled, and aged in Kentucky. Okay, that's what makes a Kentucky bourbon. So all these that say Kentucky bourbon, they were distilled and aged in Kentucky. California, Vermont, Indiana, Ohio, they can all have a Kentucky bourbon, but if they have a Kentucky bourbon, it's a sourced bourbon. And then that's how they got it because they sourced it from somewhere, took it back to California, bottled it, labeled it, and then sold it as a Kentucky bourbon. Uh, so anyway, but that's what blended is. It means you can mix anything you want as long as it's bourbon. You can mix it together from whatever distillery, from wherever you get it, create whatever flavor profile you want, and put it in a bottle and call it blended. Evan Williams surprises me because they do distill their own product. So uh, I'm not sure if Evan Williams blended is. Uh, let's see, various Evan Williams expressions. So they just took various Evan Williams expressions and blended them together to make this. So it's all probably Evan Williams products. Rare Hair is probably a bunch of different distilleries products. This one is unusual because it's one distillery that's blended a bunch of their own stuff together, like different expressions, so different mash bills and everything else they blended together to get what they got here. So that's what a blended is. There seems to be something that I'm forgetting. Oh, you all want to, if you all want to know about sour mash and sweet mash, we can talk about that a little bit. Basically, sour mash is a back set. They take it's like yeast bread. They take the mash, the recipe that they had for the bourbon, the last run that they did. They take a little bit of that back, put into the fruit so it can start the fermentation process, and it keeps a lot of that consistency with flavors and everything. Maker's Mark, Jim Beam, big places like that are definitely sour mash. Sweet mash means you start fresh. Every batch is fresh and new. It's a new yeast. They clean the lines. There can't be nothing left of the old. Everything has to be new, and it's a sweet mash. Now, sweet mash, it's harder to get that same consistency as a sour mash, uh, but there's still a lot of good sweet mash bourbons. There's a lot of good sour mash bourbons. I hope you all have enjoyed this episode. I've enjoyed making it. I've also enjoyed drinking with you guys tonight. Mm. I enjoyed finishing my Blade and Bow bottle. I don't know how my son usually signs off. I sit there and listen to him all the time, but please comment any questions you may have, especially if you're new to bourbon. I'd love to answer them. I love to talk about bourbon. If you all have some recommendations of some products that I can try or something I didn't talk about today, let me know and I'll discuss it in another video. So, I guess that's all from the Bourbon Basement. So just remember, why drink alone? You can drink with us. Good night.